On Oli here, and this is my review of The Talons of Weng-Chiang, the sixth and final story of the 14th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor. The Talons of Weng-Chiang is the 91st story overall, 6 parts long, and is written by Robert Holmes. This is also the last story to be produced by Philip Hinchcliffe, as he had to step down because of how he made Doctor Who too violent, and Graham Williams takes over in the next season, whilst Robert Holmes stays on board as a script editor for one more season. So the plot of The Talons of Weng-Chiang is as follows. Death stalks the fog-bound streets of Victorian London. Young women are going missing, horribly mutilated bodies are found floating in the Thames, and criminal gangs terrorize the innocent. At the heart of his tangled web sits the mysterious Li Chang, sorcerer and hypnotist, and his grotesque sidekick, the all-too lifelike ventriloquist dummy Mr. Sin. The Doctor dons Deerstalker and a cape to seek out the sinister force lurking in the shadows of Metropolis. For Talons of Weng-Chiang are reaching out to shred the human race. So that is the plot of that story. Talons of Weng-Chiang. What an epic story. I watched the story for the first time when I was 14 and I was in awe of it ever since. And as I said before, this is one of my favorite stories from the Tom Baker era, and I do believe that Talons of Weng-Chiang deserves every bit of praise it gets. Bearing in mind, this story does have some elements that have not aged all over the years, but I'll address that later. But I think the story production was actually amazing. The theatre and the sewer sets, and basically where Magnus Grill was under the theatre, was basic but effective. I really did like the House of the Dragon set where the final showdown took place, and I think it was amazing. The location filming, I thought it was brilliant and very well done, and I felt it definitely captured the Victorian London feel too, and I think that's what definitely made the story really good, especially mixing it in with the Sherlock Holmes elements and all that. Speaking of which, the Doctor actually has a new outfit. The outfit he actually wears for this story only, his Sherlock Holmes outfit. So even though it comes at a cost, we don't even see the Doctor's iconic hat and scarf in the story, but it was a cost that was worth it, to be honest. And I really like Leela's outfit as well, especially her outfit that she wears in the start of the story before she switches to the dress. I think that was very cool, and I actually like Leela's dress as well that she wore towards the last few parts of the story. But I think her outfit in the start of the story was pretty much the best of her outfits, to say the least. I think the script was amazing. I definitely think this is one of Robert Holmes' best scripts. The direction by Robert Maloney was very well done, and I think this is one of the best directions he's done for Doctor Who. And this is also the last story here that he directs, because he was offered to produce a new BBC sci-fi series called Blake 7 after this story. So it was definitely a good send off for David Maloney. Most of the Talons of Weng-Chiang was amazing and very well written, taking inspiration from Hammer horror story Terror of the Tongs, as well as having a very strong Sherlock Holmes influence, and obviously the plot being very similar to another Robert Holmes story, The Time Warrior, because both stories pretty much feature villains stuck in the past whilst abducting people to try and aid the villain in some form or another. So there was no way the story could not succeed. As comedic this story was, especially the Doctor volunteering for this in Chang in Part 4, especially during his performance in the theatre, as well as Jago and Lightfoot's partnership and banter, Talons of Weng-Chiang actually had some very dark themes and very dark moments as well. Like Magnus Group pretty much abducting young women and pretty much using them for draining their life force to gain to like pretty much try and make him stronger, and he was kidnapping like young prostitutes, like not just like teenage prostitutes from the streets, and I think that was mentioned in the story, and also having Li Chang getting his leg chewed off by the giant rats, and surviving, getting high on opium to ease the pain, and later dying in the Doctor's arms later on. And the racism and the microaggressions towards the Chinese characters in the story. How this got past the BBC in the 70s beyond me, but to be honest, nothing really dragged out in the story in my eyes. I think all 6 parts pretty much just went through with a breeze, even though I must admit, the bit in part 4 with the Doctor and Liz and Chang was filler, but it somehow worked for the story, to be honest. I think the Talons of Weng-Chiang had some very incredible moments that actually stand out in Classic Who itself, such as like the giant rats being one of them. I really like the part 3 cliffhanger when Leela was trying to escape from Magnus Grill's domain, but then he let loose the giant rats, and then the giant rats were trying to like attack her, and then obviously the doctor with the gun that Lightfoot gave him, he was trying to fire with it, but luckily he does at the start of part 4. I also like the powerful cliffhanger as well, where Mr. Sin and Gru had stolen the time cabinets, and you have a very evil love for Mr. Sin, which is pretty much very probably one of my favorite evil loves ever. And one last moment I thought it was great was the scene where the Doctor, Leela, Jago, and Lightfoot are trying to find a way to defeat Grill and the laser trigger finger Mr. Sin with his laser dragon beam. Plus I really like the performance of Daisy Bell in part 4 before Lisanne Chang's line came onto stage, and it was actually very funny because it was actually trending on social media not too long ago. So on to the acting of this story, which I thought were brilliant. Tom Baker did a smashing job in the story, and I definitely think that this is one of his best performances as the Doctor ever. And I really like how he did a very Sherlock Holmes-esque character. He did that very well, and I think this is an aspect we haven't really seen of the Doctor's character in, well, not fully enough. I think this is probably one of the first times that the Doctor actually does have a Sherlock Holmes aspect to the character. And I thought that was really cool, and I liked the bit in part 4 when he was volunteering for this and Chang's performance in the theatre, and I really liked the part when Lisanne Chang was actually going to fire a gun at the Doctor to try and choose the card to try and guess the card that the Doctor chose, and and I liked how the audience were like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and it turns out it was perfectly fine. And then when the Doctor came down for the Cabinet of Death, the Doctor pretty much just blundered it. I really thought it was funny. And the Doctor just pretty much smug throughout the whole thing. And I also liked his interactions with Leela as well. And then, yeah, as you can see, the two are starting to enjoy each other's company. And I liked how he was describing how he met Leela to Lightfoot, saying that she was found in Amazon in a hat box. Louise Jameson, she did a great job in the story as well, and I definitely think that this is one of her best performances as Leela ever. Leela herself had some great moments, but I like how at the start of part 3 she leaped out of a window to try to avoid getting attacked by Mr. Sin, and I thought it was great how she was able to disguise herself as one of the women that Lisanne Chan had abducted, and also like how she attempted to kill Lisanne Chang and Magnus Grul on 2 occasions in part 3 and later in part 6 when the Doctor had how she was able to make her way to the House of the Dragon. I don't know how she was able to do that. Maybe she followed them or something like that. But yeah, it was a pretty cool scene, and I think it was definitely an establishing character moment for Leela. And also like the part how she was able to jump out of the window when Mr. Sin was trying to attack her at the start of part 3. That was pretty amazing. I don't think any companion has ever done that. And there was Leela's a very gutsy companion, and it's definitely proven in this story. Leela does have some sweet moments, I must admit, especially with the Doctor and Lightfoot. But there was a scene in early in the story when she was in Lightfoot's house, and then obviously had some food laid out, and then obviously once you're eating, you're expected to use like plates and cutlery and stuff like that. Leela, obviously being from a savage tribe, doesn't know how to use them, so she pretty much is eating them with her hands, and she's offered the knife, and she pretty much uses the knife to cut the meat that she was eating with, and I think not Jago, I think Mr. Lightfoot actually liked this, and he was pretty much doing what she was doing, and then they pretty much shared like a smile with each other. I thought that scene was very endearing, and definitely shows a nicer side to Leela's character. So on to our amazing guest cast. We had Henry Gordon Jago. He was the owner of the Palace Theatre and had Lisanne Chang performing in the shows. He became suspicious when the young woman started vanishing during his performances and attracted police attention. And when the Doctor broke away the hypnosis that Lisanne Chang had put on him, he allied himself to defeat the Doctor. He allied himself with the Doctor to try and defeat Magnus Grill and Lisanne Chang. But he was under the impression that the Doctor was actually working for the police, and he was pretty much admitting it through the story, and he was just pretty much talking to the Doctor saying, "Oh, you better. I hope he has the police surrounded and all that." I really like this character, to be honest, and he is definitely one of the best side characters in Doctor Who ever. And it's a great thing that he came back to Big Finish along with Mr. Lightfoot, and how they later traveled with the Doctor in some stories as well. Speaking of Professor Lightfoot, let's talk about him. He's a pathologist, and he allowed the Doctor to use his house as a base to try and map out his plans to stop Magnus Greel. And I think he is a great companion, and I really love the camaraderie between him and Jago, and the two became very close friends, and then their partnership was very comedic, and I like the part when the two were trying to escape from the House of the Dragon with using a dumbwaiter, but obviously it didn't work, so they ended up back in the cell, and back in the cell where they were being held. So that was a pretty nice scene. Casey, he was the doorman of the Palace Theatre. He saw a skull apparition, which actually turned out to be a hologram, and he thought, and he told Jago, and when they were looking for it, they saw nothing. But obviously, he died of fright when he saw Magnus Gruel's true face, and his body ended up in the Cabinet of Death during Li Chang's performance in Part 4. He was a very funny character, and I liked him, even though he was a disposable character, but hey, you can't win them all. And we have Sergeant Kyle, a police sergeant, and he questioned the Doctor and Leela when they were attacked by Chang's men. He was one of the main perpetrators of mocking the Chinese, especially when he was pretty much mocking how the Chinese were talking. That is a scene I'm not really a big fan of, to be honest. To our enemies, first off we have Li Chang. He was a magician that used the stage name the Celestial Chang, and he served Magnus Roland by helping him to abduct young women in exchange for supernatural powers such as hypnosis, telekinesis, and telepathy. And when the Doctor started investigating the disappearances of the women, he attempted to kill the Doctor various times, which caused Greel to fall out of favor of him. And Greel then later hid Crazy's body in the Cabinet of Death during his performance, which spooked Chang. Chang was later cornered by the Doctor, but he chose to get killed by Greel's rat. But then obviously he survived, he barely survived, and he ended up losing a leg, and he retreated to one of the brothels that where I think Greel's men had actually abducted the two prostitutes that were there, and then he pretty much got high on opium to try and ease the pain, and he later died. Before he died, he was explaining to the Doctor how he met Magnus Greel, how he thought he was a Chinese god called Weng-Chiang, and how they planned to at least go to perform in front of Queen Victoria at the Buckingham Palace. He was a very good character and a very good side villain. He was written quite well, even though we're not really too sure on why they cast John Bennett as Li Chang, but I'll get into that a little bit. Mr. Singh, he was a Peking homunculus. There were small cyborgs that were made in the 51st century for Swedish children, and they contained the cerebral cortex of a pig. Side note, I did kind of find it weird how Mr. Sin randomly started oinking whilst he was trying to kill pretty much everyone in Part 6, especially after the part when the Doctor mentioned that the Peking homunculus has some pig DNA in them. But yeah, that's how he was responsible for the downfall of Magnus Greel, as he became too trigger happy with the laser and pretty much killed anyone that moved, including Greel's men, the Doctor, Leela, Jago, and Lightfoot. And now onto our big bad, Magnus Greel. He was the Minister of Justice and became a war criminal, and he escaped to Victorian London in an experimental time cabinet. He also used young women in his experiments in using his catalytic extraction chamber, in which it drains the woman's life force to try and restore his body, making it stronger. When he met Li Chang, he posed as the god Weng-Chiang, and Mr. Sin, the Peking homunculus, as the ventriloquist dummy. He later died when the Doctor shoved him into the extraction chamber, and that pretty much just destroyed him. He was a great overall villain. I liked how hammy he was. He was pretty much shouting his lines, like your typical Doctor Who villain. So I think those enemies were very good for this story, and they're pretty memorable. Definitely say they're one of the best villains for the Tom Baker era. The faults of this story pretty much comes with the fact that Talons of Weng-Chiang hasn't really aged well as the years went by, especially with the rise of social media and cancel culture and all that. And I can see how and why the story hasn't really aged, because it does have some very anti-Asian themes, such as enforcing anti-negative Asian stereotypes and the use of anti-Asian slurs, and Li Chang being portrayed by John Bennett, a white actor in yellowface. I do think it was very problematic and really shouldn't have happened, considering the fact that Doctor Who have actually used Asian actors in the past, especially in The Mind of Evil, and even this story, the actual Asian characters in this story, are just merely henchmen, which is merely disposable henchmen, to be honest. And even on BritBox, there's a disclaimer warning, warning viewers about like the themes of this story. But at the same time, yeah, even though they did, I understand how it can actually put off people from watching this story. But at the same time, you have to remember that this story was actually written in the 1970s, where caricaturizing minorities was pretty much in the norm, and now it's no longer in the norm. I'm very happy about that. And obviously, this story was set in Victorian London, where racism and against minorities was unfortunately normalized. I don't necessarily like the racism, but I don't think it should be distraction how brilliantly written and produced the story is. To sum up, I love this story, but I don't like the racism the story had. And it was actually found it rather strange how the Doctor doesn't actually call out any of the people that were discriminatory towards the Chinese, and he didn't really correct Leela when she referred to Lee Chang as the yellow one. The Doctor usually stands up for the people being targeted towards, but so yeah, I pretty much hold Robert Holmes towards that for that era. With that being said, I think Talons of Weng-Chiang is a phenomenal, iconic story. If one can bear in mind the context of how the story is written, it can still be highly enjoyed. And even though the casting of John Bennett as Lee Chang was odd to say the least, but it's still an iconic story that is definitely pretty much all Whovians have to watch. And I give the Talons of Weng-Chiang a perfect 10 out of 10. So that's it for my reviews for season 14. Stay tuned for my ranking of this season. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know your thoughts of the Talons of Weng-Chiang and this review itself. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My Discord server is in the description box below if you want to join. Until then, ta-ra!